What makes this story impossible to skip is the emotional switch at its core. A woman who once ended lives now dedicates herself to saving them, only to be dragged back into violence inside the very hospital where she chose peace. There are SEALs, mercenaries, corrupt officials, and a ticking threat beneath the building, but the real hook is Lena herself, because every scene asks whether duty can ever outrun identity. Get her out of my operating room. The surgeon's voice was ice cold. He did not even look up from the man's open chest on the table. He spoke as if Lena Brooks, standing just 3 feet away with an instrument, did not exist. She was completely invisible to him. The man on the table had about 6 minutes before his heart failed permanently, and the lead surgeon had just kicked her out. Every other nurse in the room froze. Nobody moved or even seemed to take a breath. With a soft click, Lena placed the tool on the tray, turned around, and walked out without saying a word. If you are new to this channel, please subscribe and tell me what city you are watching from in the comments. I am very excited to see how this story plays out. Please stay with me until the end. I can promise that you will not regret it. For the past 11 weeks, Lena Brooks had been a nurse on the trauma floor at Mercy General Hospital. She spent that time working double shifts and learning where the best supplies were kept. She dedicated those 11 weeks to memorizing every patient's name because she believed everyone was important. She always showed up 30 minutes before her shift was scheduled to start. That little bit of extra time was the difference between being prepared and being rushed. And Lena Brooks had not been rushed in over 8 years, but no one at Mercy General knew that about her. In fact, nobody at the hospital knew anything about her, and that is exactly how she wanted it. She completed her paperwork, she aced her nursing exams, she came in early every single day, and she never caused any problems. Her personnel file said she was 26 years old. It also showed she earned her nursing degree from a state college in Virginia. The file indicated her previous job was with a government contractor, a position she was not allowed to discuss. The Human Resources Department only inquired about it one time. A clerk from that office made a single phone call. After that one call, the topic was never brought up again. What her file did not mention was her 4 years of service in the United States Marine Corps. It left out that she was part of a scout sniper team based at Camp Pendleton. It did not show she had finished 3 separate tours of duty, and 2 of them were in locations that are still classified. And the file made no note that she had more confirmed long-distance kills than any other female soldier in her unit's history. Her record was wiped clean of all this because she followed official protocol to keep her military service confidential. The Marine Corps, to their great credit, respected her request. So in this hospital, she was just a nurse. A capable nurse, according to most people, and an extremely quiet one. She always wore her dark hair pulled back into a tidy bun. She never wore any jewelry or rings, and she kept her nails cut short because long nails could interfere with her work. She moved through the hospital with the same silent competence she had used in combat zones. Her stride was smooth, she kept a low center of gravity, and her eyes were always scanning her surroundings. She was instinctively noting every exit, identifying potential threats, and memorizing the face of every person in every room. Her supervisor was a woman named Diane Kowalski, who had managed the trauma floor for 19 years. She had the weary expression of a person who had seen it all. In Lena's first week, Diane told the other nurses that the new girl showed promise but lacked practical experience. She mentioned that Lena just needed more time on the job and would probably be fine after a year or so. Lena happened to overhear that conversation, but she chose not to correct the record. She just went back to her work and focused on more important things. The Special Forces team arrived on a Tuesday at 2:37 in the afternoon. Lena was certain of the time because she was constantly aware of it. She was applying a fresh bandage to a 63-year-old man named Frank. He had tumbled from a ladder at his son's home and had broken 3 of his ribs. That was when she heard the ambulance bay doors slide open in a way that sounded wrong. It was not the usual, smooth sound of a normal emergency. This noise was sharper and much faster. Then she heard the boots. They were not work boots. They were not the sounds of hospital staff or the comfortable shoes worn by the other nurses. These were combat boots, hitting the floor with a determination that suggested their owners were not used to being kept waiting. She finished wrapping Frank's wound, secured it with tape, and told him she would be back to check on him in 40 minutes. Then, she stepped out into the main hallway. There were 6 of them. They were all massive men, the kind of physique that is built from constant training, difficult workouts, and very little sleep. 3 of them were in civilian clothes that seemed too small for them, because regular clothes never hang right on men of that size. 2 of them were still wearing parts of their combat gear, which included armored vests. Their weapons were probably left at the entrance or in their truck. She could not be sure. The 6th man was on the stretcher. He was the only one that mattered. He was not conscious. A bandage was wrapped around his left side, and a professional had clearly applied it. It was tight and perfectly placed, without any flaws. It was the type of dressing you learn to apply while under fire, not the kind they show you in a training course. But a deep red color was already soaking through the white fabric. That indicated the wound was extremely serious, and he was bleeding internally. His skin had a pale, unhealthy tint. She could see his chest rising and falling, but his breaths were shallow and irregular. The tallest of the 5 conscious men was the one in command. He stood about 6 feet 4 inches tall and was built like a brick wall. He had a square jaw that looked like it was made of stone and a scar that ran from his left ear down to his lip. She would learn his name later, Petty Officer First Class Elias Cord. But at that moment, he was simply the man in charge, and he was not asking for permission. We need a surgeon immediately. Not in 5 minutes. Right now. The head nurse at the reception desk was a great guy named Marcus. He was fantastic at his job, but he was not prepared for a situation like this. He replied, "Sir, I have to get your patient registered in our system first." The tall man snapped back. "He does not need to be registered. He needs to be on an operating table. Where is your chief surgeon?" "Sir, if you could just—" "Where is your surgeon?" It was no longer a question. Lena saw all the color drain from Marcus's face. A small, disciplined part of her mind noted the positions of all 5 men. She calculated the distance to the emergency alarm button. She noticed that 2 of them were watching the corridor behind them, not the reception area. This told her they were not worried about the hospital employees. They were concerned about someone who might have followed them here. That was a crucial piece of information. That was something she would remember. Dr. Hartwell was already coming down the hall. She must have heard the boots, too. She came around the corner with 2 surgical nurses trailing her. She took one brief look at the man on the gurney and commanded, "Take him to trauma room 2, as she pointed down the hall. Suddenly, everyone started moving. The Special Forces soldiers remained close to the stretcher. They surrounded it on 3 sides as if they were still in a tactical formation, which, in some ways, they were. Lena blended in with the group, moving in a way that no one would notice her. She walked at a normal pace, grabbed a patient chart from a rack as if she needed it, and slipped into trauma room 2 right behind them. The room instantly became incredibly cramped. Dr. Hartwell began shouting instructions. Her surgical nurses scrambled to follow her orders. 2 of the soldiers positioned themselves to guard the doorway without being asked. It was either a trained reaction or standard procedure, she could not tell. The other 2 soldiers came into the room and were now obstructing the medical staff, which was quickly becoming a major problem. Lena moved to the right side of the gurney. She started to cut away the field dressing before anyone even had to ask her. She had performed this exact task countless times before. It was not in a hospital setting, but she had done it. The injury underneath was from a bullet that had gone completely through his left side. It had missed his spine, but it had probably hit a kidney. Judging by the blood loss, it had definitely struck something else as well. She had a new intravenous kit ready in her hand before Dr. Hartwell even had to request one. Hartwell snatched it from her without glancing to see who had provided it. Then she looked up, saw Lena, and immediately shifted her focus back to the patient without a word. That was the correct decision. Lena had to give her credit for that. But then Elias Cord put his hand on her shoulder, and it was not a friendly touch. His hand felt as heavy as a sack of bricks. The moment she felt his hand, her entire body became perfectly still. It was a type of stillness she had mastered in her combat training, a signal that a quiet voice in her mind was warning her to be ready. "You are just a nurse," he said. "This is for the surgeon. You should leave." She did not even bother to look at him. His blood pressure is falling. He is going to need a second intravenous line. And your men need to get out of this room so the doctor has space to work. His voice was cold and dismissive. "I was not asking for your opinion," she replied without even looking his way. "I am aware of that." He could only stare at the back of her scrubs. She remained focused on her work. Dr. Hartwell's voice sliced through the tension in the room. "I need better light, and I need his blood type. If it is not in his chart, tell me this instant." Without raising her head, Lena said, "He is B positive. The tattoo is on his right forearm." She saw it when she had cut away his sleeve. For a brief moment, the whole room went silent. Dr. Hartwell finally said, "Excellent. Test and match his blood just to be safe." Then, in a quieter tone that everyone could still hear, she said, "Elias, get your team out of my trauma room. All of them." Elias was visibly annoyed. Lena saw him pause before he finally responded. "We are not leaving him," the doctor corrected him with a firm voice. "You are not abandoning him. You will be in the hall, out of my team's way, while we save his life. There is a huge difference. Now, please go." Another silence fell over the room. Lena felt his eyes on her, but she did not turn around. At last, he stepped away. The door clicked closed. She heard Dr. Hartwell release a long sigh before her voice turned strictly professional. Her orders were quick and precise, asking for vitals and equipment. Lena moved in perfect sync with her. She had an unusual ability to anticipate other people's needs. This skill made her a great addition to any team. She could join any group and be a help rather than a hindrance. For the next 47 minutes, they worked together seamlessly. The patient on the operating table was Petty Officer Second Class Danny Reyes. Lena learned this from his identification tag, which she noticed as they prepared him for surgery. He had a stab wound in his side, inflicted less than 4 hours ago. It was not from a typical knife, but from something with a much longer blade. Lena kept this thought to herself. She simply passed tools, watched the monitors, and gave Dr. Hartwell information before the surgeon even realized she needed it. After 20 minutes, the doctor no longer double-checked the nurse who was helping her. When they were done, Danny Reyes was in stable condition and being moved to the intensive care unit. Dr. Hartwell took off her gloves and just studied Lena for a long moment. "How long have you been working on this floor?" the doctor finally asked. 11 weeks, Lena replied. 11 weeks? The doctor did not say anything else. She simply turned and left. Lena cleaned her station, recorded the supplies they had used, and went to see her other patient, Frank, who was recovering from broken ribs. The soldiers were waiting in the family lounge near the trauma room. All 5 of them were standing. Men like them hardly ever sit down in places like this. They were spread out across the room in a relaxed formation. As Lena passed the entrance, Elias Cord saw her. She kept walking without a pause. She heard him whisper something to the man beside him. She could not hear the words. She thought again about the injury to Danny Reyes, its exact angle and depth. It came from a blade much longer than a knife, and it missed his spine by less than 2 centimeters. That kind of injury is not the result of a training accident. A wound like that is made when a very skilled person wants to deliver a message, not end a life. Someone wanted Danny Reyes to live, at least for a while longer. She set the thought aside and got back to her duties. The rest of her afternoon was completely normal. She changed a few bandages. She wrote updates in a couple of patient files. She sat with a woman named Pauline on the 4th floor. Pauline was anxious about her biopsy results and needed a friend more than she needed a nurse. At 6:30, Lena ate a sandwich in the staff lounge. She overheard two other nurses discussing a television series she did not know. She smiled when it felt like the right time to smile. She was a master of fitting in. At 7:42, she was at the third-floor nurses' station when she noticed the men coming in through the main entrance. There were three of them. They did not come through the ambulance bay, which was the first strange thing. They were dressed in normal clothing, which was the second. One of them carried a bag that had an unusual shape for its apparent use. That was the last detail that set off all her internal alarms. It was the same feeling she was trained to notice, the one she would get in the field just before something awful happened. She had spent 4 years learning to analyze people the way most individuals read a map. The analysis was instant, automatic, and absolute. She was watching three men walk through a public area with an obviously rehearsed purpose. They were not glancing around. They did not appear to be lost. They were not there to visit a sick family member. They moved with a clear goal and in a tight formation. One man was in the lead, with two others behind and on his flanks, maintaining a specific distance. That was a military pattern. It was the type of formation for a tactical approach. These men were not American soldiers, because she knew what that looked like. This was something else. They walked past the information counter without looking, went by the chapel, and made a left toward the elevators. She knew exactly where they were headed. She pulled out her phone. She typed a short message to a number she was not supposed to have. She had it memorized from a document she saw being destroyed years ago. The message contained just one character. The recipients would know its meaning. Then she went to Marcus, who sat at his desk looking exhausted from his long shift. "Hey," she said. "I need you to help me with something." "What is it?" he asked. "I need you to walk, not run, and tell Dr. Hartwell she should consider moving her patient in the third-floor intensive care unit. Be casual about it. Do not look panicked. Then, I need you to ask if security can check on those military guys in the waiting room." Marcus just looked at her blankly. "Lena, what are you? Can you please just do this for me?" She cut in. "Well, okay, but thank you," she said, already turning to go. She went toward the stairs. An elevator is a box, and a box is a trap. She was not about to get stuck in a trap on a Tuesday in November, not in a Virginia hospital if she could help it. She hurried up the stairwell, taking the steps two at a time. She moved without a sound, her hand just brushing the railing. She came out onto the third floor through the fire door and paused. It was a very long hallway. The nurse's station at the far end had two staff members. A man she did not know was by the elevators, staring at his phone, but he was holding the phone at an odd angle, likely using the screen's reflection to watch the corridor. She turned the other way. She took a longer path around the floor, using a service corridor near the radiology lab. She approached the intensive care unit from the east side. As she passed through the second set of doors, she nearly collided with Elias Cord. He was propped against the wall outside Danny's room with his arms folded. He examined her like she was a difficult math problem. "You are the nurse for this floor," he said as a statement. "Petty officer," she replied. His attention sharpened immediately. "I did not tell you my rank." "No," she said calmly. "You did not." He slowly unfolded his arms. "What business do you have up here?" he asked. "My job," she replied. She kept her voice steady, her hands in sight, and her posture non-threatening. "And right now, my job is to tell you that 3 men entered this hospital about 6 minutes ago. Their movements do not resemble any normal civilian activity I have ever witnessed. One was carrying a bag. The change in his demeanor was immediate. His whole posture shifted. It was not a big, obvious motion, but she felt it as if the air in the room had grown cold. His body grew tight and ready. His voice became sharp and professional. "Where are they now?" he asked. They turned left near the elevators on the main floor. "I do not know which floor they went to." The man standing near your elevator on this level has been there since I arrived. He is watching this hallway. Elias studied her for several long seconds. It was not a friendly expression. It was the look of a person doing complex calculations in his head at high speed. "You need to return to your floor," he commanded. "You have 4 men, and your security is not fully in place," she countered. "How much does Danny Reyes matter to the people who injured him with that blade?" He became perfectly still. "How do you know about the blade?" he asked. "The wound." The entry was at a 40-degree angle, with a depth that indicates a blade between 18 and 24 inches long. The path of the blade missed his spine by a distance too small to be accidental. That is not an injury from a random brawl. That wound was made to send a very clear message. She paused. "So, are you going to continue asking me questions, or are you going to lock down this floor?" For 3 complete seconds, Elias Cord said absolutely nothing. She counted each one in her mind. Then, he lifted the radio on his belt. His voice was quiet and completely firm. "Ghost Hawk, pip code lock. 3rd floor is hostile. My radio indicates 3 unknown men are in the hospital, possibly a 4th near the elevator. Reyes is not to be moved until I say so. Acknowledge." 3 voices came back instantly. "Understood. Understood. Understood." He turned to face her again. "Who are you?" he asked. He had gone beyond asking what she was or how she had her information. He asked the kind of question you ask only when you meet someone who has just changed the entire game. She looked him straight in the eye. "For the moment, I am the nurse who knows this hospital much better than your team does." Lena spoke with quiet urgency. "The closet in the East Hall sees the garage. The service stairs on the north side require a key card. The room beside Danny's is empty, and the man from the elevator is coming this way right now." Elias turned his head in a flash, but she was already a ghost. She had slipped into the vacant room moments before the man approached. Flattening herself against the wall, she kept the door open just a tiny bit, giving her a perfect, secret view of the corridor. This was a part of her she had not awakened in years. Lena heard the steadiness in Elias's voice, as if he were asking for directions. "Are you looking for something?" The man's accent was difficult to identify. It had an Eastern European sound, perhaps Russian, but it was just a guess. "I need the men's room," he said. "It is at the end of this hallway." "On the left," Elias told him. She heard his heavy footsteps pass by her door. Peeking through the gap, she saw him clearly. He was a large man in his 50s who favored his right leg. His right hand appeared relaxed, but she knew better. That was the stance of a man keeping his hand close to a hidden weapon. The man turned left, but the restrooms were actually on the right. Lena knew the layout of this level by heart. When she came out of the room, Elias was still watching the man retreat. Without shifting his gaze, Elias spoke softly. "He is heading to the East Hall. A service stairwell is about 50 feet away. He is trying to find a better view. Can you get there first?" But Lena was already gone. The service corridor was tight and hummed with the sound of fluorescent lights.
That woman had never really left. She was just sleeping deep inside. Lena made it to the stairwell entrance a full 8 seconds before his heavy footsteps arrived. She ducked inside, took 4 stairs up, and watched through the wire mesh glass. He stepped into the hallway with a new sense of purpose. He reached into his jacket, but he was not grabbing for a phone. The object was small and black, and he held it with a practiced grip. She calculated she had 4 seconds, 5 at the most. She swung the door open, stepped behind him, and spoke in a simple, even tone. "I am sorry, sir, but this is a restricted area." He spun around, trying to shield the weapon with his body. His mind was scrambling to figure out if she was a threat, but she already knew what he was going to do. The second he moved for the firearm, she closed the distance. Her right hand shot out, and she executed 4 precise strikes in less than 2 seconds. Her actions were far too swift and efficient for any nurse. The man crumpled to the floor without making a sound. She caught the pistol as it dropped from his hand. Looking down, she breathed deeply, feeling that old, familiar calm return. Down the corridor, Elias Cord stood completely still. He could only gape at her, his face a mask of disbelief. Two of his soldiers appeared behind him with the quiet efficiency of special forces. A single glance communicated the entire situation. Not a word was spoken. Then, the shorter soldier known as Ghost looked from the man on the ground to Lena. He asked in a hushed tone, "What unit were you with?" Lena felt for the man's pulse. It was stable. She hadn't wanted anyone hurt. She rose, secured the pistol in her scrubs, and looked at Ghost. "I am a nurse," she said simply. Ghost shot a look at Elias, who was now studying her in a profoundly new way. This was not his typical cocky expression from the operating room. It was not his determined gaze from a few moments ago. It was a look she knew well from her time in combat. It was the expression of a man whose entire world had just been turned upside down. Finally, he spoke. "There are 2 more hostiles in this building." "No, 3, she corrected him flatly. "There is 1 more with the bag. That bag is the entire point, so he is coming." As if she had willed it to happen, Elias's radio crackled with static. A strained voice came through. "We have a situation at the south stairwell. 2 armed hostiles." Then, a low thud shook the whole building. That was not a failing generator or a small earth tremor. She recognized the vibration of an explosion, even from 6 floors away. It was a controlled blast, meant to take out a door. What came next was not screaming, but something far more chilling. A heavy, sudden silence. Then the alarms began to shriek, and she heard feet pounding on stairs. They were the wrong kind of footsteps. Not the measured steps of soldiers, but the chaotic rush of a larger force ascending from the south. Elias looked at his men, then his eyes found hers. She unclipped her hospital ID, looked at her own tired face in the photo, and laid it on the windowsill. "We need to move Danny Reyes to a secure room, behind 2 locked doors," she said with absolute authority. "I am going to need body armor, a radio on your frequency, and a rifle." Elias studied her for another beat. Then, he unclipped the backup radio from his gear and handed it over. She took it. The plastic felt warm in her hand as she fastened it to her collar. The feeling was disturbingly familiar, a memory she had fought hard to bury. But this was not the time for ghosts. "They control the south stairs now," she announced. They came in through the parking garage. The charge was placed on the service door on the 2nd floor. That door is reinforced, so they used a specialized explosive to get through it so quickly. This whole thing was planned very well. Ghost asked, "How can you be so certain it was that specific door?" "Because it is the only one on this side of the building with no security camera," she said, looking directly at Elias. "They did their homework. They have been in this hospital before." Elias tightened his jaw. "How many of them are we dealing with?" "I have seen 3, and there has to be a driver. That makes 4 at a minimum, maybe as many as 6. The last man is the one with the bag. He is either waiting for a signal, or he is the one who planted the explosive." She paused to let the words sink in. "This entire operation revolves around that bag. I was right about that. Its contents will change everything." "What makes you so sure?" Elias asked. "The other men were just a distraction. They were not carrying anything. The man with the bag is the real prize." A large soldier with a scarred hand spoke up. "Elias, we have to move Reyes immediately." "She already told you the plan," Lena stated calmly. 2 locked doors. The intensive care unit has a lockdown room with a card scanner and a reinforced steel door. Take him there now. Post 2 men outside the door and lock it from the inside. Do not make a move until you hear from me on the radio. The soldier with the scars looked to Elias, waiting for his command. Elias looked back at Lena. She could almost see him redrawing the entire plan in his mind, with her at the center. He made the call. Hawk, Pip, take Reyes to that room immediately. Secure that door. He turned to Ghost. We are moving to the south stairwell. He finally looked Lena straight in the eye. The north side belongs to you. She nodded. I have to know what is in that bag. Me too, he admitted. In that case, we should find its owner before your men can, and we need to be quiet about it. Because if he feels trapped in this hospital with all these civilians— I get it, Elias cut in. Are you sure you do? She pushed back. Your team will force him into a corner, and a desperate man carrying that bag is going to do something that nobody can take back. Elias did not speak for 2 full seconds. The only sound was the faint shriek of the fire alarms. So, you want us to what? Try not to scare the guy? He finally asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. No, she said. I want you to let me get to him first. So what is your strategy? He asked, after a moment of silence. I will find him for you. Once I know his location, your team can take him down. I just need to be the one to find him. Ghost made a short, surprised sound, somewhere between a scoff and a laugh. She knew that noise. It was the sound of a soldier accepting a new and unexpected reality. At last, Elias gave his consent. Check in every 3 minutes on the radio. If you miss even one call, I am coming to find you myself. Understood? With that, she moved toward the north wing. The corridor here was far quieter. The sirens were just a distant echo. The lights were still on, which told her the explosion was expertly controlled. She was dealing with real professionals. True experts only use the minimum force required: a small explosive for a single door, a small team to take the floor, and complete silence until the time is right. She passed a storage closet and an empty examination room. A quick peek into the nurse's station showed it was abandoned, except for a rolling supply cart. 2 of its drawers were hanging open, a sign that someone had left in a rush. She paused, then turned back to investigate. The 2 drawers were indeed open. The bottom one, where the emergency kits were stored, had been completely cleaned out. She stood perfectly still, wondering why someone with no medical background would need a trauma kit. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Someone was injured. A fight had happened somewhere between the parking garage and this floor, and now that person was hiding. Her eyes swept the corridor, but the white floor appeared immaculate. Then she knelt, and the overhead light caught a small, dark mark near the baseboard. It was a fresh smear, about 6 inches long. She rose and moved silently down the hall to the north stairwell door, just 8 feet from where she stood. She pressed her back against the wall, a familiar move from her old life. Holding her breath, she listened. From the other side came the sound of labored, shallow breathing. Someone was wounded. She kept her eyes glued to the door handle. Model. On the other side of the door, the handle started to turn. She moved back a few feet to face it squarely. Adopting a nurse's calm expression, she clasped her hands before her. Her voice was perfectly level. Sir, is everything okay in there? The handle froze. After a beat, the door swung wide open. The man standing in the doorway was a complete shock. Her plan vanished, but she was quick to adapt. He was young, perhaps in his mid-30s, with a face that could have been handsome. Now it was just a mask of pain. He was clutching something, guarding it with his life. With both hands, he clutched a bag strap, hugging the heavy thing to his chest. His left hand was shaking, not from fear, but from losing too much blood. A brand new first aid kit was still wrapped in plastic on his belt, completely useless. He was cornered, unable to tend to his wound while protecting the bag. When he saw her, he stopped cold. She gave him the same reassuring look she gave all her patients, a look that said she had everything under control. You are hurt, she stated simply. He said nothing. It is on your left, she added. The injury looks like it is just under your ribs." Her eyes went to his left arm, which he kept pressed firmly against his side. "You need medical care for that wound," she urged. "If you let it bleed, you will not have the strength to finish this." His eyes scanned her up and down, searching for a threat. He looked for a gun, then a comm unit, before settling on the device on her collar. His expression hardened. "Who are you talking to on that?" he demanded. "I am speaking with my team," she said. He scoffed in disbelief. "You are a nurse. Nurses do not have teams." Her voice was like steel when she answered, "This one does." She took a slow step forward, keeping her hands where he could see them. "I am not going to hurt you. You have to trust me. Whatever your mission is, there are 63 patients here. 42 more are on the floor below. They have nothing to do with this." "Now let me see that injury," she said. He just shook his head. "The patients do not matter to me." "I already know that," she answered. "You are here for Danny Reyes." Hearing the name made his tough exterior fall apart. He suddenly seemed like a man who had been carrying a terrible burden all alone and had just found help. She saw the look and knew she was right. The wound was a message, not a kill shot. His connection to Danny Reyes was personal. "What is in the satchel?" she asked. He watched her for a long time, then spoke. "Proof," he replied. She let the word hang in the air, giving him space to say more. "Is it proof of who gave the order?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "It proves why. This paperwork has a name on it so big, no one would ever believe it without this evidence." He squeezed his arm against his ribs, and his face went pale for a second. "The people after me do not want me gone. They want this bag. It holds proof of everything they did. It holds their direct commands." His voice grew faint from the blood loss. "It is a different thing, you see. The injury was a warning. The conspiracy is the crime." At that moment, her radio hissed to life. Elias's clear, calm voice came through the speaker. "North Team, give me a status update." The man's head snapped toward the radio. She met his stare as she raised a hand to the device. "North Sector is all clear," she said. "I have found an injured civilian who needs medical attention. He came in from the north stairwell." After a pause, she added, "He is not a threat. I repeat, stay put." The answer came back in 3 seconds. "Copy that. Holding position. You have 2 minutes." She held out an open hand to the man. "Let me hold on to the bag for you," she said. He gripped the strap tighter. "I am not trying to take it," she explained, "but you cannot hold it and let me fix your wound. If I do not stop that bleeding, you will pass out in about 6 minutes. I will guard the bag. I will not let it leave this floor," she promised, "but you must let me work." His eyes moved from her hand to her face. She stood perfectly still, knowing one wrong move would look like an attack. Finally, he gave her the bag. Taking it, she was surprised by how heavy it was. She placed it on the ground by her feet and guided him to sit against the wall. She ripped the trauma kit off his belt, tore open the packaging, and started treating his wound. It was a clean slice, 5 inches long, and dangerously deep. The blade had just missed a major artery. She moved quickly and efficiently. Through gritted teeth, he asked, "How do I know you will not just hand over the bag?" "You do not," she said honestly, "but I have a strong guess what is in it. I know who it points to, and that it nearly ended Danny Reyes's life. You can trust that I understand its value, or you cannot. It will not change anything. I am fixing this wound because it is my job." He let out something like a dry laugh. "You are no ordinary nurse." "I am a nurse," she corrected him. "I am just also a few other things." Once the bandage was on, his breathing evened out, but he still looked drained. She stood up, picked up the bag, and helped him to his feet. He took her offered hand. Elias and Ghost were waiting right around the bend. When Elias saw her supporting the injured man and holding the bag, his face showed pure confusion. He was not angry, just completely stunned. He looked like his whole world had been turned upside down. Ghost, on the other hand, locked his eyes on the bag. "Is that it?" he asked. "It is," she said. "This has to go somewhere safe, and it must be handed to someone with the right authority. I am not giving this evidence to any local cop." She stared directly at Elias. "You have to make a call right now," she ordered. "Already doing it," Elias replied, holding up his phone. The man she had treated, still nameless, rested against the wall. "What happened to the other 3?" he asked. "We have 2 of them cornered in the south stairwell," Ghost answered. "She took care of the 3rd. The man gave a small nod. "There is a 4th man in a car outside. He has a detonator." Elias looked up from his phone. "A remote for what, exactly?" Before the man could answer, she cut in. "The bomb at parking level P2 was just to get through the door. A remote outside means that was a diversion. There is a second, larger device," the man said softly. "It is on a support beam between parking levels P1 and P2. It has a timer and also a remote." The clock started as soon as they came inside. The hallway fell completely silent. "How long do we have?" she asked. He looked her right in the eye. "The timer began 19 minutes ago, when I walked through that door." She turned to Elias, but he was already moving. "Ghost, get everyone in this hospital to the east side. This is not a drill. Evacuate everyone now." He was all business, his voice low and commanding on the phone. It was the voice of a leader taking charge. "Get the bomb squad to the garage immediately," I said into my radio. "There is a second bomb on a main support pillar. The timer is running." "Yes, I mean now." My mind was already doing the math. 19 minutes gone. Take away the time we just spent talking. That leaves us with maybe 14 minutes, probably less. I faced the injured man. "Can you walk?" He nodded. "Good, because it is time to move." I gave the heavy bag back to him. "Guard this until the right people get here. Understand? Do not set it down. Do not give it to anyone unless Elias introduces them himself." He took the bag. "Why trust me with this again?" he asked. I met his gaze. "Because you already bled for it. When a person is willing to bleed for something, they do not give it up easily," I said. "Besides, I have another job right now." I left him and closed the distance to Elias in 4 long steps. He was still on his phone but looked up as I approached. I could see something new in his eyes, a deep respect that was not there 20 minutes ago. Everything between us had changed. I spoke quietly. "The guy with the trigger is sitting in a car out front. The disposal team will get him," he said. "Their fastest response time is 12 minutes, I replied. "We have 14 minutes left on a good day. That is a 2-minute window if I am right." I kept pace with him, and that guy is going to speed off the second he sees people evacuating. The man clutched a detonator that made any timer irrelevant. He had to be taken care of before the bomb squad could even approach. Elias came to a sudden halt. So did I. We stared at each other in the corridor, and I could almost sense the war in his mind. A part of him wanted to dismiss me as just the nurse, but that part was failing against the man who saw what I did for the last 40 minutes. He finally asked, "What is your real name?" He was not talking about Lena Brooks, the nurse. He wanted to know who I used to be. I looked straight at him. "Corporal Lena Brooks, Scout Sniper, 4th Marine Regiment." I did 3 tours. My words filled the space between us. "Elias, I never miss." He studied me for a long, quiet second, absorbing the truth. He finally made a decision. "Our car is in the ambulance bay. A duffel bag in the back holds a rifle." He continued. "It's secured with a level 3 combination lock. The code is the year the Marines were founded, with 2 zeros at the end." I replied without hesitation. 1775. He said, "You've got 12 minutes. I was already on my way. I flew down 4 flights of the empty stairwell in under 30 seconds. I burst through the service door and out into the ambulance bay. I moved with purpose and speed, quickly crossing the distance. The team's black SUV was parked at the other end. I got there, grabbed the bag from the back, and had the lock open in 3 seconds. Inside was a Mark 12 precision rifle with a suppressor and a full magazine. My hands knew the weapon. Like meeting an old friend I thought I had lost forever. I pulled out the rifle, put on the sling, and set up near the edge of the ambulance bay. From my position, I had a perfect view of the garage and street while staying concealed in the shadows. It took me around 40 seconds to find his vehicle. It was a standard black sedan parked on the north side of the street, giving him a great view of the garage. The car was running, with a man in the driver's seat. I steadied my body against a concrete pillar. I have made much harder shots than this. Shots in gusting winds and pouring rain, on moving targets from hundreds of meters away with nothing but my training. This was just a simple 80 meters. The tinted window was a small obstacle, but nothing to worry about. I peered through the scope. The man was focused on the hospital entrance, a phone in his hand. I saw him check the screen, likely waiting for a message from his partners inside. That message would never arrive. I took a slow breath, released half of it, and kept my aim steady. My radio clicked twice. It was Elias. 2 clicks means hold your fire. I held my position for 3 seconds. Then 5. I kept the phone in my sights, my mind flashing to Danny Reyes in surgery, a clear reminder of the stakes. I pictured the 63 people on the 3rd floor, and the 42 more on the floors beneath. My thoughts also went to that evidence bag. It contained a secret so vital that a Navy SEAL's life was deemed a worthy cost to secure it. The driver glanced down at his phone, his thumb poised to send a message. I remained perfectly still. There was no reason to shoot yet. I just needed 10 more seconds. That was all it would take. I realized long ago the most difficult part of this job is not pulling the trigger. It is the waiting. His phone's screen illuminated. His gaze jumped from the phone to the building and back again. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. I could now hear shouting from the east wing. The staff had started to evacuate patients. The evacuation had become impossible to miss. I could see employees through the windows pushing people in wheelchairs, and the driver saw it too. I witnessed the precise moment he realized what was happening. I watched him weigh his options. His thumb started its downward motion. I fired. The suppressor dampened the noise, but it was not silent. They never are. The car window exploded as the phone flew off the dashboard. His hand was nowhere near it. I did not shoot at the phone, and I did not shoot at him. My bullet shredded the front tire and destroyed the axle. The car was completely disabled. The impact triggered its alarm, creating a new distraction for him. In the chaos of the next 5 seconds, the bomb squad radioed that they were on site. I finally exhaled, got to my feet, and swung the rifle onto my back. A single click came over the radio. That was Elias. 1 click means all clear. I stood there in the ambulance bay, the cool air on my skin, listening to the evacuation. I remembered a gray morning leaving my base, sure that I had left that world behind for good. Apparently, I was wrong. I had just swapped one war zone for another. Inside that hospital, a woman named Pauline was probably anxious about her lab results. Frank would be needing fresh bandages for his 3 broken ribs, and Dr. Hartwell was at the center of it all, making sure her patients were moved to safety. The hospital was safe because, 12 minutes earlier, a man I had helped in the hall chose to trust me, and I had put my trust in him. I found my hospital ID badge on a windowsill where I had left it. Someone had kindly moved it to a supply cart for me. I had no idea who. I clipped it to my uniform. Then I turned around and walked straight back into the organized mayhem. I passed gurneys, intravenous poles, and dazed patients. The other staff were managing the whole thing with a specific combination of talent and adrenaline that I knew all too well. It was how I had stayed alive for 4 years. A few people noticed the rifle on my back. They would glance at it, and then their eyes would dart away. People usually look away when a situation becomes too real. I took the rifle off, tucked it under my arm with the barrel down, and found a nurse I recognized. Her name was Teresa. She was a steady nurse, always calm, with 2 years on the job. I asked her, "Who is still up on the 3rd floor?" Teresa was pushing a wheelchair and holding a chart. She looked at me, then at the rifle, and then replied, "We still have 6 who are tough to move. They need a full team. Diane is up there with them." "Is anybody else up there with them?" I asked. Dr. Hartwell went back. She refused to leave her post-surgery patients. That was exactly what I expected from her. I carried the rifle to the supply closet behind the nurse's station and locked it inside with my key. After that, I headed for the stairs. The 3rd floor was unnervingly quiet. All the beds near the exits were now unoccupied. The last 6 patients were still there, connected to a web of tubes and monitors that required a doctor's sign-off to be moved. They were too delicate to be wheeled into the corridor. Diane was at her desk, phone pressed to her ear. She had the look of someone who had handled emergencies her whole career. Her expression was resolute, her gaze was sharp, and she was completely in control. She spotted me and spoke into the phone. "One moment, please." She then looked at me. "Where have you been? Helping with the move?" I offered her a short, one-word response. Diane studied me for a second. It was the kind of look a manager with 19 years of experience gives a skilled but new employee. But the nurse in front of her now had dried blood on her arm, and a deep calm that felt earned by experience, not by nature. Diane went back to her call. "I need a full transport crew on the 3rd floor. I've got 6 patients that are hard to move, and I need them out in the next." She glanced up at me. 8 minutes, I stated. 10, at the absolute most. Diane relayed the information, ended her call, and then said, "The bomb squad is in the garage." "I know. They are on it. The other bomb is wired to the main support beam. It is on a timer, but its remote trigger is no longer a threat." Before Diane could question how she knew that, Lena walked to the first patient. He was a 71-year-old man named Warren, admitted 3 days ago for a heart condition. He was wide awake and watched Lena with the perceptive eyes of a man who knew true danger. "Are we in some trouble here?" he asked. "We are being careful," Lena replied. "There is a very large difference." "Yes," he agreed with a nod. "Careful is smart." She inspected his lines and monitor, planning how to move him with a portable unit. At that moment, Dr. Hartwell entered through the fire door behind her, pulling on gloves as she moved. She headed straight to a patient's room without a word, every movement filled with purpose. That was Hartwell. That was Dr. Hartwell, all focus and professionalism. As Lena was adjusting Warren's intravenous drip, Elias Kaur walked in through the same fire door. He carried himself with a completely different energy than he had earlier in the day. Before, he was a man radiating power, with a dismissive attitude as if he was in charge of every room he entered. The power was still there, but the arrogance was gone. It was replaced by a look of exhaustion and respect, the quiet discomfort of a person who knew he had made a huge misjudgment. He walked directly to Lena, bypassing both Diane and Hartwell. He spoke only to her. "The bomb squad has eyes on the device." This proved far harder than anyone imagined. Disabling it took a full 11 minutes. The clock now showed just 7 minutes remaining. "I am aware," she said, meeting his gaze. A remote deactivation was impossible. This model used a mechanical trigger and a digital backup system. They had to disarm it by hand. Their only choice was to speed up the evacuation. She returned to check on Warren's intravenous line. He was studying Elias with a knowing look, the kind that recognizes a soldier in any uniform. In a hushed tone, he asked, "Young man, will this hospital still be standing in 10 minutes?" Elias stared at him. His composure slipped for just a moment, revealing the man beneath the professional mask. He answered, "Sir, We are using every resource we have to ensure that it will be. Warren considered this, then gave a small nod. Very well. I trust you. His gaze shifted from Lena to Elias and back again. He leaned back into his pillow. If that is true, then I have nothing to worry about. Lena's expression remained neutral as she moved to the next bed. Ghost appeared 2 minutes after Elias had. The men stood by the nursing station, their conversation quiet and urgent. Lena continued her work, checking patients and organizing the evacuation route. She could overhear fragments of their discussion. They mentioned Vasek, the patient she had treated, now under guard in a room on the second floor with 2 soldiers posted outside. She also heard a phone number relayed to someone likely being woken on the other side of the world. Ghost mentioned 2 men in the south stairwell, but she missed the specifics, only that the situation was handled. Then Elias posed a question. What is her military background? Ghost replied, I pulled her service file. Camp Pendleton Scout Sniper. She served 4 years with 3 tours of duty. Her old commanding officer called her the most talented soldier he ever commanded. He also said she left the service for personal reasons he never learned. A short silence passed before Elias spoke again. I believe I might know why. His voice was softer, lacking its usual commanding tone. Lena kept working. With 6 minutes and 40 seconds to go, the radio on Elias's belt crackled. A voice announced, The device is secure. I repeat, the secondary device is no longer active. The timer stopped with 4 minutes and 11 seconds left. Lena could hear Diane let out a shaky breath right behind her. She also heard Dr. Hartwell mutter something that was part prayer, part profanity. In times like this, the two often sounded the same. But Lena just continued with her tasks. Warren's drip bag needed adjusting. The patient in the next room was due for pain medication in 40 minutes, and the man recovering from surgery in the corner had a slight fever that had gone unnoticed while everyone was focused on not dying. The work did not stop just because the danger had passed. This was a reality about her life that most people never understood. A crisis does not erase your responsibilities. It just piles on new ones. Elias walked over to her. She was looking at a chart and did not lift her eyes. She held it up between them like a shield, an instinctive gesture she did not think about. He said to her, You can stand down now. I am standing down. This is what my version of relaxing looks like. He waited for a moment. She could feel him watching her. Men like him had a way of observing that always set her on edge. It was a focused intensity, taking in every detail without speaking a word. Finally, he said, Vasek told us what was in the bag. She flipped to the next page on the clipboard. I think I have a pretty good idea. No, you do not understand. He told us who gave the order. She froze mid-page. Lena refused to look at him, but her whole body became tense. How far up does this whole thing go? High enough to ruin the next 6 months for a lot of people. He let his words hang in the air. High enough that the team tonight will not be the last one they send for that bag. That made her look up from the chart. He was standing much closer than she had thought. They were nearly the same height. At 5 feet 9 inches, she frequently took larger men like Elias by surprise. Her posture made her height seem like a deliberate weapon, not just a fact. She finally asked, Are you telling me this is not over? I'm telling you that Vasek needs to get that bag into the right hands, and it has to happen soon. He will require protection, which my team will provide. He paused, and she knew there was more. But the people who sent the first team know they did not succeed. They know where it all went down. And they are going to get very interested in who was inside this building that was not supposed to be. He looked directly at her, which means they are going to get interested in you. She placed the clipboard on the counter. Her actions were slow and measured, like a person preparing for a fight. Are you saying I am a loose end that needs to be tied up? I am saying you need to be gone by sunrise. She met his gaze and held it for a long, quiet moment. The fluorescent lights above them made a low humming sound. From down the hall, a patient called out for a nurse. Warren watched the two of them with the calm curiosity of a man whose 70 years on Earth had taught him to read any room. Lena spoke. I took this job 11 weeks ago to help people. I did not pick this hospital because it was safe or because I thought I would be protected here. She picked the chart up again. I am going to finish my shift. Elias just looked at her. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. She found that very interesting. Men like Elias Kaur were rarely at a loss for words. At that moment, Ghost appeared at the doorway. We have a problem, he said. The problem was Danny Reyes. But it was not a medical one. In fact, Danny's condition was improving. His blood pressure was now stable, and his surgery had been a success. The issue was with the two soldiers Elias had posted at his door. One of them, a man called Pip with burn scars on his face, had found someone else in the intensive care unit. This person had no business being there during the lockdown. He was a hospital custodian named Gerald, a night shift worker for the last 11 years. He had his identification. He was in uniform, and he had a good reason for being there. The only thing wrong was that Pip had found him with his ear pressed against Danny's door, listening in. By the time Lena and Elias got to the intensive care unit, Gerald was sitting in a chair in the hall. Pip stood over him while another soldier guarded the exit. Gerald was talking nonstop. He obviously knew how bad this looked and was desperately trying to make it seem normal. I was just doing my rounds, that is all. I heard a sound, so I got closer to the door. Anyone would have done the same thing. Pip was a silent, imposing figure, a man who used quiet as a weapon. Gerald looked up and saw Lena. His expression shifted. It was not relief, but some twisted form of it that felt all wrong. You have to tell them, he pleaded. You need to tell them I work here. You know who I am. He was right. She did know him. Lena had seen Gerald hundreds of times, pushing his cleaning cart down silent hallways, offering the staff a quiet nod. She had filed him away in her mind, just as she did with everyone. His face, his build, his routine. Gerald always started his shift at 11. He took a break at 1:30. He typically finished cleaning the third floor by 3 in the morning, but it was not yet 1:30, and he had no reason to be on this floor this early. She asked him, Gerald, which supervisor asked you to begin your route up here tonight? He just stared at her. What are you talking about? Your normal route does not bring you to this floor until after 2 o'clock. You are almost 2.5 hours ahead of schedule. Who ordered the change? His frantic talking stopped. She could almost see the thoughts racing in his mind as he searched for an escape, and she watched him make a bad choice. He tried a different lie. I was covering a shift for a co-worker. Martinez wanted me to trade with him. Martinez went home sick at 4 o'clock this afternoon, Lena replied, her voice steady. I watched him walk out myself. A heavy silence filled the hallway. Gerald did not say a word. From behind her, Elias spoke. Gerald, this is your final opportunity to make things easier on yourself. Gerald's gaze jumped from Elias to Pip, then back to Lena. She saw the fight drain from his face. It was the look of a man who had no options left, who was just waiting for what came next. He finally spoke in a hushed tone. I was only supposed to find out his room number, that is all. Just the room number. I did not know what they planned to do. He paused and swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. They swore it was only for information. Who swore? Elias demanded. I do not know his name. Some man called me 2 days ago, and he talked as if he knew my entire life. Gerald looked down at the floor. When his eyes met hers again, they were filled with a kind of pain that had nothing to do with his job. He knew about my son, about the trouble he is in with some very bad people. The man on the phone had told him to just make a couple of calls at certain times and report who was on the floor. He promised that nobody would be harmed. Lena watched him, knowing that the part about his son was absolutely true. She had no doubt about it. It was a classic move powerful men used to control people. They had a gift for discovering a person's greatest weakness, and it was clear they had found Gerald's. They had found his weakness and used it against him. This did not make his actions right, but it made them understandable. Lena asked, "Gerald, what was the phone number of the man who called?" He said the number was private. "Did he call your cell or a hospital phone?" Gerald's expression changed as he stared at her. She had seen that look on Vasic and Elias. It is the moment a person sees their own terrible mistake. "My cell phone. The number may be private, but the call data is not. A forensics team can pull that information in about 40 minutes. She looked toward Ghost, who was in the doorway. "Get his phone to the team handling Vasic's evidence." Ghost looked at Elias, who gave a sharp, certain nod. Gerald stood up slowly, his gaze fixed on Lena. "Can you guarantee my son will be safe?" She replied, "I cannot give you any guarantees. But if that number is what I believe it is, you will have something to trade. You have no leverage right now. You must prove how valuable your information is." He nodded, and seemed to age 5 years in that moment. He made a terrible choice for a loving reason, a weight he would carry forever. She knew that weight well. Hawk softly took Gerald's arm, guiding him to the stairs. Elias was still watching her. Elias had been watching her the whole night. She was slowly growing used to the sensation. He said, "You managed that situation with incredible skill. He does not seem like a bad person." She corrected him. "He was a useful person. There is a distinction." "How did you know he would be honest about the phone?" "Because he is not the type of man who can create a believable lie under pressure. The truth was his only path forward." She paused. "I also saw his hands when I brought up his supervisor. Most people will grab their phone to confirm a story. He did not even flinch. He knew he had no support, and he knew that I could see it." Elias remained silent for a moment. He finally ended the quiet. "You have been doing that all evening." Lena looked up, wary. "Doing what, precisely?" "Analyzing people like they are an open book." She almost told him the truth, but stopped herself. "Instead," she said, "it is a helpful skill in an emergency room. It is helpful in many situations." She held his gaze. His tone was not casual. It was intentional. It was the voice of an operator setting up a request. They lead the conversation so you agree before the question is even asked. She cut in. "Whatever you are about to ask, just stop. I have not said a word." "But you were going to." He watched her for a long moment before he continued. "Danny will require protection when he is discharged. A team is being formed. The people from tonight will be back. The evidence from Vasic's bag is worthless unless Danny can testify. He heard the order. He survived, and they know he is alive." She said plainly, "So you want me to throw away my career. I want you to understand that your abilities are being squandered here." She nearly laughed, but forced it down. This was not the time, and she was afraid if she started, she would not be able to stop. She recognized the feeling from her former life, the one that arrives after the danger has passed. 11 weeks ago, she started, "I decided to take this job. I had my own reasons. It was not because I was exhausted or felt beaten. I chose this because I want to mend what is broken. My work is not less vital than yours. It is just a different kind of duty." Elias was quiet for a second. He did not argue with her, which was somewhat surprising. Then he spoke once more. "Pauline is on the 4th floor. She has been waiting for biopsy results for 3 days." Lena froze. "How do you know about her?" "Marcus told me. He said you stayed with her for an hour last week." He paused to let the statement land. "He also said you were the only one who did." She just stared at him. The hallway was quiet, just the two of them and Pip at the front desk. The hospital was returning to its normal state. There was the constant hum of equipment, the faint scuff of feet, and the soft talking of people who were still there, still breathing, and still in need of help. She said, Danny Reyes is going to require a bandage change in the morning. Elias nodded. After that, he needs a full discharge plan with follow-up instructions. The next person on his case must know his injuries and his care. I am the most qualified person in this hospital to create that report. You are, he acknowledged. So, I will complete that task first. After it is finished, I will give you my response. He agreed to her terms. He began to walk away but paused and looked back at her. He said, "For what it is worth, what I said in the operating room when I told you to get out." He paused, looking for the correct words. I was mistaken. She simply watched him. That was not a simple admission for a man like him. She could see the great effort it took for him to say that. It was not a trick or a performance, just a plain truth he had to acknowledge based on what happened. She answered, "You were doing what you felt was necessary." No, I was being arrogant. Sometimes those two things are the same. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile, but not really. "No," he confessed, "I do not believe they are." She moved on to continue her patient checks. Warren was asleep, which was an excellent sign. His vitals were stable, his color had returned, and his hands were calm on top of the blanket. His body finally trusted that it was safe enough to sleep. Lena stood at the end of his bed, just observing his breathing. The simple act gave her a quiet, deep feeling of accomplishment. Next, she went to Pauline's room. Pauline was awake and sitting up in her bed. The television was off. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she wore the expression of a person who had thought of every possible outcome. She looked at Lena as she walked in. "Is it all done? All of that noise?" "It is done," Lena said. She pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down for the first time in 4 hours. Pauline watched her for a moment. She was 61, and her face was more than pretty. It now carried a certain wisdom. Her face was like a map of her experiences, a story she carried with dignity. Pauline said, "You look as if you have just been in a war. It was a very difficult night. I am not referring to the hospital duties." Pauline spoke with a directness that comes when there is no more time for pretense. "You have the appearance of someone who has done this sort of thing before, not the medical work. The other business, whatever it was." Lena looked down at her own hands, which she had scrubbed clean twice. "I did it frequently in my past life. Tonight was a powerful reminder that the past is always with you." Pauline thought on that, then said, "My daughter always told me I should have been a nurse. She says I have a natural ability for looking after people." She stopped. "I think I chose accounting because I was scared to care so much." Lena met her gaze. "So, how did that turn out for you?" A faint smile formed on Pauline's lips. "Not very well, frankly. It seems you end up caring for people regardless of your plans." "Yes," Lena said gently. "It does seem to happen that way." They sat together in the silent room. The heart monitor beeped a steady, comforting rhythm. Down the hall, the hospital was slowly putting itself back together. That is what hospitals do. They take in disasters and keep operating. It is their job and the job of the people within them. Lena thought about the proposition from Elias, the bag of evidence, the wounds on Danny Reyes, and a misty morning at Camp Pendleton. So much was different now. She weighed all her options, but none of them felt easy. She was still sitting there when Pauline's phone vibrated. It was a call from the laboratory. She waited as Pauline answered it, and she took her hand as the news was delivered. It was the kind of news you want a person with you to hear. It was the best possible news. Pauline's tests came back negative. There was no sign of cancer. The lump was only a benign cyst, a secret terror she had lived with for months. Now, it was just a cyst, not a monster. Pauline began to weep with the deep, trembling relief of someone who had been holding their breath since Thursday and could finally breathe again. Lena just held her hand. She did not say it would be all right. No one can promise that, and Pauline was too smart for empty words. So Lena simply stayed with her. That was the only thing that counted. She had learned long ago that sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone is your company when everyone else has gone. Lena finally left Pauline's room sometime after midnight. Pauline was on the phone with her daughter, crying at first, then laughing while still crying. She said thank you to Lena 3 times, and Lena accepted it graciously each time. She knew that to refuse someone's gratitude is a form of cruelty. Walking down the hall, she felt the heavy, late-night silence of the hospital. It was a special kind of quiet, filled with the weight of fragile people being cared for by a staff powered by coffee and a deep sense of mission. They were all there because they understood their work was vital. It was always vital. The nurse's station on the 3rd floor looked normal again, but that was only on the outside. Everything was back in its proper place. The computer screens glowed steadily and the medical charts were stacked perfectly. Yet, the feeling in the room was completely wrong. It was like the aftermath of an earthquake, where the damage is invisible, but you can feel it everywhere. Marcus sat at the nursing station. He saw her approach, and his entire expression changed. In her 11 weeks at the hospital, she had never seen this look on his face. He was not looking at a new hire anymore. His gaze was serious, heavy, and impossible to understand. He said just one thing. "They need you downstairs." She asked him, "Where?" He replied, "The main trauma center." So she headed down. Elias was there, inside the family meeting room, the most secure place in the building besides a patient's room. Ghost and Pip were there, too, with the man she had nicknamed Hawk. There was a 5th person she did not recognize. This woman was in regular clothes, but a government identification card was clipped to her jacket. She had a tense posture, the kind you see in people who know a single mistake can cause disaster. A bag sat on the table directly in front of her. Lena looked from the bag to the woman. Lena spoke first. "Who are you?" The woman answered, "My name is Carver. You do not need any other name. I got the call while on an airplane and have been awake for 22 hours, so let us get straight to the point." She then opened a folder that was on the table. Carver began reading from the documents inside. "Corporal Lena Brooks, you were a scout sniper with the 4th Marine Regiment. You served 3 tours of duty, and 2 of them were secret missions. The official count is 17 confirmed kills from a distance, with many others not on the record. You received an honorable discharge this past November and started as a nurse at Mercy General 11 weeks ago." She looked up at Lena. "Did I forget anything?" Lena coolly sat down, though she had not been invited to. Nobody tried to stop her. "You forgot to mention that I chose to leave that world behind." Carver's expression did not change. "I did not forget that. It is written right here." Her tone was not mean, just incredibly direct. She spoke like a person who knew that being polite and being effective are not always the same thing. "Then tell me why my decision is being ignored tonight." "Oh, your decision is very important," Carver replied. "What you did earlier was not the action of someone who has left that life behind. It was the action of someone who merely swapped one kind of weapon for another." She paused to let her words have their full effect. "I must know what side you are on." Lena glanced from Carver to Elias. He was silent, leaning against the wall, like someone ordered to watch but not to interfere. Her eyes returned to the bag. "I made a choice to stop ending lives," she said. "I wanted to start saving them. Too many people are trying to destroy the world." "I thought the world needed more people trying to heal it," Lena added. "I still think that is true." Carver wrote a quick note in her file. "This bag," she started, "is about to trigger a huge federal case. We are looking at a minimum of 3 government agencies, and possibly 2 foreign governments getting involved. The papers inside identify the man who sent the team after Petty Officer Reyes. He is a high-ranking director in an extremely powerful organization." She let the information sink in. "By sunrise, he will realize his plan failed. By lunchtime, he will find out about this bag. Then he will use all of his power to make it disappear." Lena responded, He already tried to do that once tonight. Tonight was messy and rushed, Carver said, correcting her. His next attempt will be quiet and deadly. She looked directly at Lena. This is why we must discuss your returning to duty. Lena knew what was coming next. You are going to order me to go home. I am going to warn you of the extreme danger you are in if you go back. I promised Elias I would work until the end of my shift. Carver glanced at Elias, who did not react. She then turned back to Lena. We have procedures for this. We can move you to a secure location. No, Lena said firmly. Corporal, that is not who I am anymore. Lena cut in, her voice completely steady. I am a nurse in this hospital. My patient up on the 4th floor received good news about her cancer, and I have to book her next appointment. Warren is in room 12 and needs his heart checked at 6 in the morning. Denny Reyes has to have his dressings changed at 7 in the morning, and I need to file his release forms by 9. She took a slow, deep breath. I am the best person in this hospital to do those things. I will provide any help I can with your case. But when we are done, I am resuming my work. A heavy silence descended on the room. From the corner, Ghost made a sound that was somewhere between a chuckle and a choke. Carver watched her for a long time without a word. All right, she finally said. Tell me everything that happened tonight. Start from when the 3 attackers walked in. I want every single detail, every decision, and every single action you took. This will not be quick. For the next 90 minutes, Lena gave her report as if she were in a military debriefing. She delivered the facts chronologically, with total precision and zero emotion. She only stated things she knew for certain. She detailed the locations and movements of every person there. She explained the injury to Vasek, its significance, and the signal it was meant to convey. She analyzed Gerald with pure, cold reason. Lena laid out her observations, the suspicions that grew from them, and the final judgment she made. She never said she had a hunch. She said the information indicated a certain conclusion. It made her story solid and undeniable. Carver absorbed every single word. Her questions were sharp and targeted, proving she was assembling a much larger puzzle. She was fitting Lena's story into a bigger intelligence picture. Then Carver asked, describe the shot on the vehicle. You estimated 80 meters with a silenced Mark 12 rifle, shooting through a tinted window. You targeted the tire to disable the car but not harm the person inside. That was an incredibly skillful choice. His life was not part of the mission, Lena stated. I only had to stop him for 45 seconds. And you were certain you could make that shot? From 80 meters? With a rifle I know inside and out? Absolutely. Carver wrote something down. Your old commander mentioned your amazing self-control. He told me most snipers go for the easy kill. He said you always had the wisdom to wait. Lena answered, my commander was always very kind in his evaluations. He said you were the best he had ever seen. Her quiet answer was, he was an excellent man. After 90 minutes passed, Carver closed the file. Her next words were a complete surprise. I owe you my thanks. You saved very important people tonight. You also saved evidence that will expose some very dangerous truths. I also want to say that I understand what this has cost you personally. Lena met her gaze directly. It was not the kind of cost you think it was. No, Carver replied. I know it was not. That is precisely my point. With that, she stood up and left. Her people gathered their things with the silent efficiency of seasoned experts. Ghost walked out without looking back. Pip, who was not a man of many words, gave Lena a nod of pure respect. Hawk spoke with clear admiration. That was some incredible work you did tonight, ma'am. Lena took his praise just as she had taken Pauline's earlier, because both were genuine. It is always best to simply accept what is true. Elias was the last one remaining in the room. Lena knew what was coming. She felt the conversation brewing throughout the whole meeting, like the pressure in the air just before a big storm. You do not try to avoid it, you simply get ready. He broke the silence. I was on the phone while you were talking. I am aware of that, she said. You are? He asked, genuinely shocked. Elias, you have been in this hospital for 9 hours, most of it during a crisis. For the last 90 minutes, you just stood over there with nothing to do. It was clear you were making calls. He gave her a very specific look. It was his subtle way of showing astonishment, but you could spot it if you knew what to look for. It was about the son of Gerald, she said. His financial problems are being resolved, he said. She waited a second before asking, how did that happen? Carver has her ways. Gerald confessed to everything, and his phone history confirmed your story. That information opened up one new path, which then led to 2 more. So Gerald proved to be useful after all, even if by accident. It felt right that his son would not pay for what his father had done. That was a very generous thing to arrange, she told him. It was also a very practical thing to arrange, he replied. I am learning tonight that sometimes an action can be both. She picked up her hospital identification badge from the table and studied it. You said earlier that Danny needs to deliver that bag to the right people. You also said that he would require protection. That is correct, he said in agreement. And when this case truly begins, certain people will need to be found. These are people who are masters at not being found. The unspoken suggestion filled the space between them. That type of work demands a lot of patience. It demands absolute precision. It demands the skill to understand people and events, to know the perfect moment to move and the perfect moment to stay still. She looked directly into his eyes. That does not sound like a job for a bodyguard. No, he said. It sounds like a job for a field agent. I am describing a position that requires every single one of your talents. Not just the caregiver or the marksman, but the whole person you are. It is the ability to soothe a terrified woman in the dead of night, then make a silenced 80-meter shot at a tire with only 4 minutes left. He stared directly at her. That combination of skills is nearly unheard of, Lena. She turned the plastic identification card over in her fingers. It was a simple piece of plastic with her picture, name, and title. It stood for 11 weeks of an entirely new existence. If I go with you, she asked, who will handle Warren's 6 a.m. heart monitor check? Elias replied plainly, someone else will take care of it. And what about Pauline's appointment? Another person could do it. The other 43 patients on this ward have wonderful doctors and nurses who definitely do not need me. Elias said it again. A different person will do it. He waited a moment. The real question is if anyone else can do what you are capable of. She met his gaze. Someone else can do almost anything. What really matters is if they will do it with the same dedication. And would they? She considered it deeply. She had to concede that they sometimes perform even better. She slipped the identification into her pocket and got to her feet. I am going to check on how Danny is doing. He moved to the side so she could pass, and she felt his presence behind her as she walked down the corridor. She saw that he kept more space between them than he had 12 hours before, when he placed a hand on her shoulder and told her to get out of the operating room. The distance between those moments was not something you could measure in inches. It reflected everything that had occurred since. Danny Reyes was conscious. She was not expecting that. She entered the private room to find him propped up on 2 pillows with his eyes open wide. The heart monitor beeped a strong, regular rhythm, confirming he was alive. He had the expression of a person who had slept through the main event and was now piecing together the story from the aftermath. He was younger than she imagined, likely in his early 30s. He was built for agility, not size. He possessed the trim, strong muscles of a man used to moving quickly in hard places, his whole body conditioned for that one purpose. His face held a look she had seen before on other Special Forces soldiers. It was not pure toughness, but a quiet sense of acceptance. He looked like a man who had witnessed the worst of people, made a firm choice to endure, and found a certain peace in that decision. He followed her with his eyes as she came into the room. He spoke first. Are you the nurse? Yes. Elias told me about you. He paused, choosing his next words with care. He said you were something special. She began checking his blood pressure and intravenous lines without a word. He spoke again. The bag. Vasik's bag. Is it secure? It is under protection now. She replied. Carver has it. He exhaled slowly. That single breath seemed to let go of so much pressure. It was the sound of a man who had been focused on one objective for a very long time and was only now starting to unwind. I was protecting that bag for 6 weeks, he explained, even before the stabbing. Before I knew they had identified me. She looked at him. The knife was how they told you they knew you saw the order. The knife was just to frighten me. They avoided killing me because a dead Navy SEAL creates too many problems. But an injured one who keeps his mouth shut can be explained away as a training accident. His jaw tightened. They misjudged just how much trouble I was prepared to cause. She finished with his blood pressure cuff. You were the target tonight, the second explosive. I know. They finally concluded that the risk of being exposed was acceptable. I know that too. He was quiet for a beat. Because Vasich made his move, because the bag was on its way here. As soon as it reached the authorities, a living witness becomes a liability, but a dead one is easy to justify. He held her gaze. They made a calculation. The only reason I am still breathing is that someone in this hospital calculated differently, she responded. A few of us did. He was quiet for a second. Elias described what happened with Vasich in the North Corridor. Another pause. He also mentioned what you told him about staying, about being the one who solves problems. She pulled up his file on the tablet. Your vital signs are stable. You need to get some rest. I have been out cold for 6 hours. That is not quite the same as resting, but it is close. He looked straight at her. I will be giving my statement. Whatever Carver requires, whenever she requires it. I have been pushing toward this for 6 weeks, and this mission is not finished tonight. I know, but I need you to realize that no matter what you did this evening, staying or going, it is a hard decision. His voice was low and steady, the voice of someone who understands that difficult choices are never easy. Because I have been out on missions, and I have also been laid up in a hospital. They have more in common than most people realize. Both of them demand your complete focus on the thing right in front of you. Both of them make you invest more than you probably should. She said, you need to sleep so your body can heal from Dr. Hartwell's work. A small smile touched his lips. Yes, ma'am. She completed his chart and went to the door. Her hand was on the frame when he said her name, Lena. She stopped. My mother is a nurse, he said. She has done it for 30 years, down in San Antonio. He paused for a moment. She always told me the hardest lesson is learning when you need to push forward and when you need to hold back. She said some nurses never get it right. She also said the ones who do are worth 10 of the others. She stood by the doorway a little longer. She did not look back. She said, Get some sleep, Danny. She stepped back into the hall. Elias was standing there. He had been waiting with the calm patience of someone who knows you cannot hurry certain things. She told him, I have to complete Danny's discharge forms and his plan for continuing care. This will probably take about an hour. I need to make sure his next nurse has every piece of information they need. She hesitated. After I finish this, I will go talk to Diane. Elias inquired, What will you say to her? The truth, or as much of it as I am allowed, that I am requesting a leave of absence, and that I plan to return. She looked at him with a determined expression. I plan to return. I know you do, he responded, and she knew he truly believed her, not as a polite comment, but as a statement of fact. He said everything that way, with the conviction of a man who knew empty words have a high cost. She walked to the nurse's station, retrieved Danny's file, opened a new discharge document, and started to fill it out. The ward was quiet all around her. The monitors continued their steady, comforting pulse. Further down the corridor, a sleeping patient stirred, and a nurse silently adjusted their blankets. And beyond the hospital walls, the city carried on like all cities do at 2 a.m. It simply moved forward, completely unaware of what had just happened within this single building. She wrote the summary using precise medical terms, noting everything Hartwell would need and what the following doctor would require. The wound information, the surgical steps, the medication schedule, and all of the follow-up care were perfectly organized for a smooth transition. She did this work just as she had handled everything else that evening, with absolute concentration and no shortcuts, because she understood this effort would directly affect a person's well-being. That was certain now, and it would remain certain long after she was gone. She had just reached the pain medication section when Diane Kowalski came to the desk. Diane studied her for a long time. Her eyes went to the chart Lena was writing in. She looked at Lena's hands, where faint marks from the night's events remained after being washed 2 times. She glanced toward the consultation room door, which now seemed to hold the memory of federal officers, Navy SEALs, and 3 hours of choices that no one can ever prepare you for. She then asked, "Are you planning to explain what happened here tonight?" Lena said, "I will tell you most of it. There are parts I can share." Diane repeated her phrase. She took a chair and sat on the opposite side of the counter, settling in a way that showed 19 years of practice had taught her that the real talks always happen at 2 a.m. across a desk. "Was any member of my staff in danger tonight because of your presence?" Lena looked directly into her eyes. "No, the danger was already present because of a patient. My involvement made the situation more secure. It did not cause the risk." Diane thought about that. The men in suits who left 20 minutes earlier were federal agents. The matter was now in the hands of the right authorities, and the tactical agents from before were still present. One is a patient who should be discharged in about 36 hours with a care plan that I am preparing now. Diane remained silent for a while. It was the quiet of someone assessing the circumstances with logic instead of feeling. It was the same way of thinking that had run a trauma ward for 2 decades, preventing both the people and the department itself from collapsing. Diane broke the silence. "Are you telling me you are quitting?" "No," Lena replied. "I am just taking a leave of absence. I fully intend to return." "For how long?" "That part is still uncertain." A newfound respect flickered in Diane's eyes, just as it had during the hallway crisis. 11 weeks ago, I saw you as capable but inexperienced. I was wrong, Lena countered. You could only form an opinion on what was visible. I only saw what was on the surface, Diane admitted. After 19 years, I still misjudged you. She paused. Why did you not tell me any of this? It was separate from my work. It was not separate tonight. I suppose it is now, Lena acknowledged. Diane glanced at the patient's chart displayed on the monitor. Her eyes scanned a few lines of the text. This notation is outstanding, she commented. Thank you. This follow-up plan is far more thorough than Hartwell's usual work. Dr. Hartwell is a surgeon, Lena clarified. She is not the one who writes them. No, Diane agreed. But it is clear that you are. Getting to her feet, she instinctively straightened her scrubs. Whiteman, I want you back as soon as possible. I am putting you on days. I need that clear-headed thinking when things are busiest. Lena met her stare. I will be back. With a single, decisive nod, Diane signaled the matter was settled and returned to her office. At 3:47 in the morning, Lena finished the report. She printed the document, added her signature, and placed the chart in the file for the next shift. She peeked in on Warren. He was fast asleep, his hand resting on the blankets. Pauline was also in a deep slumber. The dark screen of her phone suggested her daughter had made contact and was now at peace. Inside the locker room, Lena swapped her scrubs for street clothes, taking a moment to get used to the different material. She detached her security badge from its cord, holding it for a second. Then, she slid it into the breast pocket of her jacket. The placement felt familiar and right, like other mementos from a life that always lingered. Elias waited for her near the ambulance bay doors. She could see Ghost, Pip, and Honk through the glass. Their movements were precise and purposeful, like a team getting ready for their next assignment. She walked out into the cool night air to join them. The city hummed with its low, constant rhythm, a sound echoed by the hospital behind her. She never looked back. This was not a permanent departure, so a final glance was unnecessary. Looking back is reserved for farewells. Their journey lasted 4 hours, crossing through towns she had no business recognizing. It made no difference to her. Place names had lost their importance years ago. Only 3 things were important: their heading, the mileage, and her companions. She verified all 3 as they pulled away. Ghost was driving, with Pip in the passenger seat. Hawk watched their tail from the back. Leaving the hospital did not mean they were safe. Elias was beside her. He was not sleeping. She knew that particular type of alertness well. It came from intense training and discipline, not from being well rested. It was a force of will that held exhaustion at bay. She was awake too, but not tired. An event like this burned away any sense of fatigue. It left behind a sharp focus, a temporary state of mind that she knew would not last. After about 3 hours, Elias finally broke the silence. "You should try to sleep." Her response was simple. "So should you." It was their only exchange. They completed the journey in silence. As the car continued onward, her thoughts drifted. She imagined the relief on Pauline's face upon hearing the positive outcome. She visualized Warren's hands, calm and still upon the covers. She recalled Danny Ria's words about her caring too much. It was possibly the truest assessment she had received in a long time. They were heading to a location that could not be named. Its coordinates were known only to those who were part of it. It was a safe zone, fully equipped with everything they required, and run by people with a shared worldview. The guard at the first security stop spotted her hospital badge, her sole form of identification. His gaze shifted from the badge to Elias. Elias uttered 2 quiet words. The guard waved them through without making a note. Inside, Carver was expecting them. She was on the phone, positioned near a table cluttered with folders, a laptop, and 2 coffee cups. One cup was drained, the other half-finished. When Lena walked in, Carver motioned to a chair. It was an unspoken order from a person 4 hours deep into a major event and running on no sleep. Lena took a seat. Elias stayed on his feet. Carver ended her call and wasted no time. "We alerted the deputy director about the investigation at 5:47 this morning. Federal agents had him in custody by 6:12. His legal team placed 3 calls to his office in 20 minutes. 2 of the people they called are now in our custody as well." She took a quick breath. "The package you secured gave us the lead we needed. Vosik's intel will support it. Danny's testimony will make it undeniable." She looked directly at Lena. "Your timeline from the hospital shaped our entire tactical plan. Our position was weak before your involvement. Now, it is ironclad." "Then the whole thing is finished," Lena said. "This part of the operation is finished," Carver clarified. "The full investigation might last a year, or even longer." She glanced at the cluttered table. He was not working alone. Some were direct accomplices, some just ignored it, and others enabled him. Untangling that network is a massive job for the federal authorities. Ghost's voice came from the doorway. The mercenaries were funded through a shell corporation, which was itself buried under 3 other businesses. "We are working our way through those now," Carver responded. "But their danger has passed. They only got paid if the deputy director remained free." "Which means he cannot pay them anymore," Lena finished. "And what about Vasik?" Carver's gaze locked with hers. "What is your concern?" He arrived at the hospital wounded, carrying that package, fully aware his own side could be after him. He is not military. He is not a professional operative. He is an ordinary person who witnessed an injustice and put his life on the line. Lena's voice was firm. So what becomes of him? Carver's expression changed, not to softness, but to clear respect. He is safe with us. After the story breaks, we will determine the best way to acknowledge his courage. Another pause. He asked for you. What did he want to know? He needed to know if the nurse made it out okay. Lena lowered her eyes to her hands. Please tell him she is safe. The questioning went on for the next 2 hours. It was a detailed debriefing, more like a formal report than a conversation. They reviewed her timeline, the location of each operative, and the logic for every choice she made. Her answers were delivered with a consistent, quiet confidence. She never speculated or added any details. A man with a recording device came into the room. A quick glance at Elias earned her a slight nod. This part was, for the record, she repeated her entire account verbatim. The truth does not change depending on the audience. It was a principle from the battlefield that proved just as useful in the emergency room. When the man with a recorder left, Carver closed a file. We have one final item. Lena waited. It seemed the deputy director's network was even wider than they knew. Carver spun a laptop to face her. This intelligence arrived 3 weeks prior to the attempt on Danny Reyes. We delayed action to protect our source, which slowed our response. Carver tapped the display. Just read the bottom line. Lena leaned in. The last part of the message was brief. It listed an unfamiliar name, a grid location, and a case number. That case number was hers. She scanned it again before sinking back into her seat. They were aware of my presence, she murmured. They were aware of Corporal Brooks, Carver corrected. They knew a retired Marine sniper started a job at that hospital 4 weeks after Danny Reyes' unit was relocated. They could not determine if your arrival was random chance or if you were involved. Last night's events forced their hand. Lena raised her head. This was not a puzzle. She understood perfectly. She just needed a second to process the implications. And then the pieces fell into place. You had surveillance on the hospital from the start. He did not deny it. Last night was not just a reaction to Vasik's phone call, was it? This was your plan all along. The mission was already underway, Carver stated. Vasik showing up simply accelerated our timeline. We have been building this for nearly 2 weeks. The intention was always to intercept Danny before he was discharged. Carver hesitated. You were identified in our strategy as a random factor. From the entrance, Ghost echoed softly. A random factor. Elias was silent, his eyes fixed downward. His inner conflict was written on his face, the expression of someone burdened by a decision with terrible consequences. She spoke his name softly, Elias. He raised his eyes to meet hers. You were completely in the dark. Your only responsibility was Danny. You walked into a critical situation with a dying man and performed exactly as you were taught. We did not inform you of the operation because you were not on the team. She stared back at him. This guilt you are feeling is not yours to own. He observed her for a while before he spoke. For 11 weeks, you were inside that place completely alone. I was inside that place, performing the duties I was hired for, she replied steadily. Being labeled a wild card on someone's spreadsheet does not alter a single thing I did for the last 11 weeks. It only shows that the situation was more complex than I realized. Nothing more. He remained silent. She met his eyes, saw the guilt, but would not let him take blame that was not his. He gave a slight nod. Okay, yes, Carver observed them both. She had the intense look of an analyst processing new data on her team. She said, We have a position open. Lena looked at her. This role is not in any official files. The work that matters most never is. But the job is very real. It is vital, and it demands a unique skill set that I just spent 6 hours confirming you possess. She turned her laptop back to face Lena. It is for a federal task force that is building a case against 3 more people inside the deputy director's circle. This assignment requires someone who can move through medical environments completely unnoticed. It needs a person who can identify and manage threats as they appear. It also requires making difficult decisions under pressure without waiting for instructions. She looked up from the screen, and it needs someone who understands that the people in those hospitals, the patients and the staff, are not just obstacles. They are the entire reason for our mission. The room fell silent. Lena finally broke the stillness. For how long? We do not know. This type of operation does not have a fixed timeline, and my job at Mercy General, it would be secure? Officially, you will be on an extended medical leave. We will take care of all the paperwork. You can return to your position when this is finished. Carver watched her with sharp, penetrating eyes. If you take this job, that is the absolute truth. Lena glanced at Elias. He watched her with the same powerful focus he had since she threw him the intravenous bag. He had caught it without looking, but his eyes had locked on hers, as if he had discovered something completely unexpected. She had seen that look her entire life. Men were always trying to understand her, to reassess her, to place her in a box she would never fit. She never minded that they looked. She only minded when they failed to see that who she was intentional. It was not a product of her past. It was a choice she made and fought for every single day. She said, with total confidence, "I have 2 conditions." Carver responded, "Name them." Vasek gets a real life, not an existence hiding in witness protection. I want a signed guarantee for everything he is entitled to before I begin. That is agreed. And I need 72 hours, Carver asked. For what purpose? To return to my hospital? Carver's expression changed. It was not surprise, but immediate caution. That location is an active crime scene. However, the mission timeline can accommodate a 72-hour pause. Lena replied, "The 3 people you are after will not vanish in 3 days. And I have patients who need to know that I did not just abandon them." She let her words hang in the air. "I promised a woman named Pauline I would be there for her next appointment. I told a man named Warren I would check on his heart at 6 this morning. I prepared a discharge plan for Danny Reyes that I must give to his new doctor personally to ensure she knows his complete medical history. To them, these promises mean everything." She looked directly at Carver. 72 hours. Carver glanced at Elias. Elias was looking at Lena. He said, "She is asking for 3 days to complete her duties." Carver said, "I understand what she is asking for." "Then you ought to say yes," he advised, "because she is correct about the schedule. She is correct about her patients, and she is correct that it is important. And if you refuse," he added, "you will begin this new alliance by showing that the one thing she values most is worthless to you." A long silence filled the room. Carver looked at Lena and finally conceded, 72 hours. Lena said quietly, "Thank you." She slept for 4 hours in a small room that had the distinct smell of every government building she had ever known. It was an odor she once disliked but now found oddly reassuring. She woke up feeling entirely renewed, the way a person does when their body receives exactly what it requires. In the kitchen, Ghost was already up, drinking coffee and reviewing a report. He looked up when she entered and said, "She sleeps," in a monotone voice, as if making a formal record. She answered, "So do you, it seems." A faint smile almost touched his lips. Elias drove her to the hospital. She was surprised that it was only the 2 of them. She had expected the entire team, like on the journey out. But this time it was just Elias, the open road, and the soft light of early morning. He drove with the same precise skill he brought to everything, with no wasted effort. After an hour of quiet driving, he finally spoke. "Would it be okay if I asked you a question?" "Yes." "Your separation from the service, Camp Pendleton, last November. You said you decided to do something different. He kept his eyes fixed on the road. What made you decide to work in a hospital? She considered how to tell him the complete truth. She had given Carver and the others the official version last night, but she had not told them the full story, not the true story. She started, I had a soldier in my unit, Corporal Trevino. On my last tour, he was shot in the hip. I was the one who treated him in the field before the medic arrived. I just kept him talking, kept him conscious, and when the medic finally reached us, he made it. She took a breath. He told me later that the one thing that kept him fighting was not the pressure I applied to his wound. It was that my voice did not sound afraid. He said I spoke to him as if we had all the time in the world. She looked out the passenger side window. I spent 4 years hitting targets from 500 meters, but the single memory that stands out is keeping one man alive simply by talking to him like time was not a factor. She took a deep breath. I wanted to do more of the second thing, she said, and a lot less of the first. Elias drove on in silence for a long time as the road unfolded before them. Finally, he said, Trevino, is he still in the service? No. He left the year after I did. He works as a paramedic in Phoenix now. Good, Elias said softly. Yes, she answered. It is. A different kind of silence settled between them, a more comfortable one. Then he spoke once more. I must be extremely clear with you about something. Okay. When Carver explained the mission this morning, she made it sound simpler than it really is. One of the 3 targets has global operations. Part of this assignment will be overseas. It might take you to places that feel more like the first kind of work than the second. She looked directly at him. You are giving me a warning. I am being precise, he corrected her, after a small hesitation. I was not precise with you back in the surgery room. I made a fast judgment about you, and it was a serious error. It almost cost Danny his life. I will not make that mistake a second time. He turned his attention back to the road. So, yes, I am being precise. This assignment will not always be the second type. She answered, I understand, and I am still returning to that hospital for 72 hours. When that is over, I will handle whatever comes next. She turned to him, her expression firm. I was never afraid of the first kind of work, Elias. I just became tired of it being my only option. She paused. If I have an opportunity to do both, then I will do both. They drove in silence for another few minutes before he spoke again. You need to know, when Carver reviewed the mission timeline, she confirmed one thing without saying it out loud. I know what she omitted. Do you? It was about the service file they obtained, he said. The only reason you were classified as a variable and not a target was because someone stepped in. A person saw that order and placed a hold on your file before the deputy director's office could take action on it. Lena turned to look at him fully. So that is why you had a team position near the hospital, whether you realized it or not. The SEALs arriving was not an accident, and sending Danny to that specific hospital, Mercy General, was not an accident either. Elias remained silent. Carver kept silent to shield her source. But that source is the only reason I am alive and sitting in this car with you. Her eyes were locked on the long stretch of highway ahead. When you find out who it is, you have to tell me. He answered, The moment I know, you will be the first to know. She gave a slight nod, trusting his word. She looked out the window, considering a world where a complete stranger could see her name on a list and decide to save her from being a pawn in someone else's game. The thought was almost too big to comprehend. She thought about it for a second, then pushed it away. There was a job to do, and she needed total focus for what was coming. At 10:30 that morning, the hospital came into view. She had seen it from this exact angle many times before, coming in for an early shift. It was just another building, but it contained 1,000 separate life stories at any given time. The sight had always moved her in a powerful way. She felt that same emotion now. It was different this time, yet still linked to the original feeling, the way that true emotions often are. Elias pulled into the ambulance entrance. He shifted the car into park, and she started to open her door. But then he spoke her name. She paused. He said, "That note in the file? Calling you a variable? I just need you to know that anyone who spent 20 minutes with you would never choose that word." She turned to meet his gaze. He continued, "You are not a variable. You are the most dependable and constant person I have met in years. I do not say that without reason." For a moment, she simply held his gaze. She understood a response was not needed, so she kept her words short. "I will see you in 72 hours. Then she exited the vehicle. Marcus was at the main desk when she came inside. He looked up, his face showing the familiar cycle of shock and concern she had seen all day, but his final look was kinder than the others. "Warren has been asking for you," he said. "I know," she replied. "I am on my way there now." She took the stairs. She went straight to Warren's room to honor her word. He and Elias had trusted her the night before when she promised to do whatever it took. That was a promise you had to keep. Warren was propped up on his pillows, working on a crossword puzzle. He had the calm expression of a man who had already decided how he would face the day. He glanced up as she came in. "Well, look who decided to show up." She asked him, "How are you feeling today?" He answered, "Exactly like a man who has been lying in a hospital bed for 4 days. To be blunt, I am ready to get out of here." He set his puzzle down. "You came back." "I said I would, that you did." He watched her for a second. "You seem different." "I am the same person." "No," he said gently. "You are the same, but the day is different." He looked at her with the deep wisdom of a long life, reading the story of her struggle in her eyes. "Did you find the answers you needed?" She looked at his chart, then back at his face. "I believe so, yes." "Good," Warren said, giving a nod. "That is what difficult moments are for." He picked up his puzzle again. "I am searching for a 6-letter word that means having courage through hardship." She thought for a moment. "How about strong?" He counted the squares. "Too short." "Maybe brave," she suggested. He checked again. "That one does not fit either." She stood next to his bed, thinking of the ordeal she had just come through. She thought of the next 72 hours, the work ahead, and the hospital filled with people needing care. She considered the very precise and difficult life she had chosen. Then the word came to her. Valiant. Warren wrote it in. He looked at the completed puzzle. Then his eyes met hers and a slow, knowing smile formed on his face, the kind you see when the perfect answer falls into place. "That is it," he said. She smiled, put his chart in its holder, and went to find Pauline. Next, she had to file Danny's discharge papers. After that, she went to the nurse's station, grabbed the next patient's file, and resumed her rounds. This was her purpose, and it was her identity. Nothing and nobody had ever been able to alter that one simple fact. Not her time in the Marine Corps, not a deployment overseas, not a knife used to threaten her, and not an official government inquiry. And it certainly would not be some bureaucrat who treated her like she was just a number. Lena Brooks was never just a number. She was a nurse and a Marine. She knew the space between saving a life on a battlefield and saving one in a hospital was a gap she could make as small as she wanted, and she had made that decision a very long time ago.